I'm trying to really push this message, like pay attention to all the deer, especially in those situations where, you might have kind of a low deer density, or you're in a situation where observation, just like a typical field edge thing, isn't going to happen, because what one deer shows you is important. So, like we kind of write off the forky that comes down and crosses the river, but tomorrow it might not be that forky, and in the way he cruises through the land and uses that ridge and the way the wind was blowing, all of that stuff's important. And so those observation sits, it's kind of part scouting, but it's also like you're actively hunting for tomorrow. If you see what you need to see, you're moving. And if you don't see what you need to see, you're probably moving too.
Lights, camera,
follow the trail.
ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera!
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
Trail Cam Radio from the guys at Exodus.
All right, we're live. We have Tony Peterson here on the Zoom call this morning. How's it going, Tony?
It's going good, buddy. How are you doing?
Good. So where are you sitting right now in location to the United States?
I'm sitting on my couch in my basement. No, I'm in just north of the Twin Cities in the suburbs there, and on the top side of the cities. And so I just got back from a little trip over to Wisconsin to do some deer work, and now I'm back in the office for a couple days.
Cool. Yeah. So for people who don't know who you are, do you mind just taking a moment or two and just kind of explain a little bit about who you are?
Sure. I got into the bow hunting industry in 2006. I used to be the associate editor for Peterson's bow hunting magazine. And then I went freelance for, probably in 2009, I guess, and did that, writing for a bunch of different magazines and doing some TV work, and just, anybody who called was probably going to get a yes at some point, when you're a freelancer. And now I'm working with Mark over there at Wired to Hunt and Meat Eater, and doing most of all of my deer stuff over there at Meat Eater, and still have, like we were just talking off air, I still have a lot of bird dog work that I do for different magazines and podcasts. And so I'm kind of out there all over in the hunting space in a lot of different ways.
Got it. So what did you do before you freelanced, starting like 2009?
Before I got my first gig in the industry at Peterson's bow hunting, I did all kinds of stuff. I worked for a mortgage company, which I hated. I worked for a company here that owned a bunch of different liquor stores and did management stuff for them. I worked at Cabela's one night a week for the discount and the benefits. I did wine tasting. I sold wine. I did all kinds of stuff, man. And it was, it was weird for me. As soon as I graduated college, the next day I got paid to write my first article. And it was a little fishing article that, it paid like $35, and I was just stoked. I was like, holy cow, maybe this is a possibility. And that article hit, and I got a call the next day from the editor of Peterson's bow hunting, and he needed an associate editor and had been talking to the editor at Outdoor News. And they asked me to come interview, and I was like, I cannot believe I just graduated college, and I was like, now I'm going to get hired in the bow hunting industry off of one fishing article. And it almost worked out that way. My interview was taking my editor bow fishing, and he offered me the job, but I would have had to relocate to LA. And I was like, are you kidding me? This is, it felt so good up into that point. And I was like, I can't do it. And so I just, cobbled together different jobs, did whatever I could. And then 3 years later, he came back and he said, I got a job for you in Minnesota if you want it. And so it worked out. It was odd how that worked out.
Yeah. What a place for someone to work like that, that's interested in that topic, to go to LA, which would probably be the exact polar opposite of where you'd want to be.
Man, this is probably not where you wanted to go with this podcast, but it taught me a lesson about the hunting industry. And, this is not like an indictment on anyone or anything, but we had, at that time, that was the company that owned, 17 different hunting magazines and was like the major player. It ended up being the company that now owns the Outdoor Channel and the Sportsman's Channel, and, big, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they had a publishing office in LA, and they had when you look at a talent pool for graphic artists and production managers and stuff. Like, I mean, that's kind of the place.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understand why that happened. It's not like it seems crazy when you just hear it, but it made some sense. But at the same time, it taught you, like, man, in a lot of these, hunting publications and these platforms at that time anyway, there were a hell of a lot of people who didn't know anything about hunting. They were calling the shots. And so it kind of set the stage for the rise of outdoor television. And then, that wave breaking and giving a space for, this kind of platform, and the Steve Rinellas and the Randy Newbergs of the world, like all of that stuff set up this next wave that we're in now.
Interesting. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's crazy. The transition has felt very slow, but then when you zoom out just a little bit, it feels like it's going pretty quickly now that the snowball is starting to roll down the hill.
Yeah. Well, you never know you're in it until it's, you never know that kind of stuff's happening until you're 5 years into it and people are already starting to get sick of it and look for the next thing. I mean, that's just human nature.
Yeah, that's cool. That's an interesting kind of career path there to where you've ended up today. So I guess for people listening too, who aren't very familiar, I guess if you had to kind of describe your hunting approach or you as a hunter, can you take a second to explain that?
Yeah, man. I probably do, I'm primarily a whitetail bow hunter. I love to hunt out west, but whitetails are, my passion. And I probably do about 85% of it on public land. It kind of back to the same thing. When I was an editor at Peterson's Bow Hunting, I was so exposed to kind of some of the big names in the industry, both on the TV side and the print side of things. And I realized, I was like 26, 27, 28. I'm like, this is so not relatable to me, and when we heard from people, they were writing letters then or sending in emails. It's kind of the same thing. It was like, it's cool that they're out there killing these giant things, but like my life is hunting public land in Pennsylvania. Like, why? I don't care about these people growing deer. Can we see more of this public land stuff? And when I went freelance, I was like, my ticket to actually make a career out of this is going to be like, go hunt challenging deer and do things that are relatable. Mm-hmm. And so I made that decision partially, kind of had a little chip on my shoulder to show people that you could, because a lot of people in the industry told me you couldn't. Like at that time, they were like, you're not going to make a living shooting big bucks on public land. And also just like, I felt this weird obligation when you're getting paid to create hunting content. I'm like, I don't want to just phone it in and go, shoot a big buck on a feeder in Texas and then try to pretend it was challenging. Like I want it to actually be something that I can say, listen, yeah, this kicked my butt for a long time, and here's the lessons I learned. I hope you could take something away from it. And it just changed. It really was a good decision that I didn't see coming. Like I got lucky with that one because it made me enjoy hunting in a way, especially whitetail hunting, in a way that I just, to this day, it gets me up in the morning.
Mm-hmm. So picking up the DIY public land stuff in your mid-20s, it sounds like, growing up, you were probably hunting more private stuff, maybe family farms, private ground. And then you transitioned into more of the DIY public land stuff after you kind of had your foot in the door with the industry.
Yes and no. So I grew up just on permission-based stuff. So, my dad would get us permission somewhere, and then that farm would get sold. And so right from the get-go, when I started in Minnesota, you could start hunting when you were 12. So when I started hunting, we always hunted a mix of private and public, but I always had that mentality that a lot of people have today, that the private's always better. So for a long time, if you were given the choice, it was like, you could hunt this person's, dairy farm or whatever. It's private. It's gotta be better than the public land down in, along the river or wherever. And I lived with that mentality for a long, long time. And I see this, I'm sure you guys see this too. Like it's prevalent in the hunting industry, but when you get out there, you realize it's kind of like bird dogs, right? Like everybody will say, black labs are good hunters. And I go, well, which one? That one or this one? Like they're individuals. Individual properties are the same way. So if you blanket statement and say, well, private land is awesome. Like, I don't know. I have permission to hunt this dairy farm in southeastern Minnesota that sucks. And on paper, it looks like it should be amazing, but it gets pounded, and it actually, I think, gets more pressure than some of the public land because of that mentality. And so you could look at that and go, well, that should be better, but it's not. Like in reality, when you get out there, you go, I'm fighting way more people and fewer deer. And I could be going to hunt public land and working a little harder to get in there. And it's just such an individual thing. And so it's an easy thing to say when you learn it. It's a hard lesson for people to learn until they go out and do it.
Yeah, I think, that mentality, that train of thought, again, goes back to some of the previous media, some of the content that the industry puts out, and that train of thought gets in people's minds. And unfortunately, sometimes it is very hard to break. I mean, we look at ourselves and, even a mix within the office, there's a lot of guys here hunting public land. There's a lot of guys hunting private land. There's guys that hunt both. And, knowing what you just said is true wholeheartedly, we still get in these Monday morning conversations of being on private thinking we should have a better opportunity versus public. I mean, it's a hard thing to kind of get out of your mind.
Yeah, you're totally right too. We do internalize this. We've been told this a long time. And I think we've got a problem in the hunting industry where we've kind of told people how to kill deer, but we haven't encouraged them to learn to hunt. And so,
100%.
I was thinking about this. If you see, I'll use this example. You see people making these, it's kind of like a rubbing post, right? That has, it's on springy thing. And there's a couple of different ones out there, but you put it out there in a food plot or whatever, deer walk up to it. They like to leave their scent on it. They rub it. And it's like supposed to be kind of this congregation point, this communication thing that you can put right where you want to kill them. And I was thinking about that. And I know some of the origination of some of those. And I was like, this is a result of not being able to bait anymore in certain areas. And it's like, it's kind of like, I want to kill deer, but I don't want to learn how to hunt. And like, listen, that stuff's fun. It can be it can be good for inventory or whatever. So I don't want to really knock it, but the industry is full of stuff like that promises, okay, here's how you're going to have success and kill deer. But we should really be pushing this message. Like you should learn how to hunt first, like learn what deer like to do. Then you can bring in all this other stuff and have some fun with it. But if you don't understand the basics of what deer like to do, where you like to hunt or where you might like to travel, it's kind of all for naught.
So where would you, where would you direct someone to go in and like really look at the basics on how to hunt, not how to kill deer, but how to hunt? Like where would you, like, what would be the three things that you told them?
The first thing I would say to anyone is don't limit yourself. So this happens to me all the time where somebody will send me a message and it'll be like, man, I got these 2 bucks crossing this field, and they'll send me a map, like, or a screenshot of their aerial photos of their hunting property. And they'll be like, there's my stand. And I'll be like, what do you mean? Like, is that it? Like, if that's your spot, like how limiting is that? And we do the same thing, kind of back to what we just talked about, like I hunt 40 acres in X state or Y state. People say that all the time. I'm like, well, is there any public land down the road? Like, can you, because when you think about how you limit yourself, this is why mobile hunting got so popular partially, and why so many of the absolute killers out there are mobile hunters to the nth degree, is because when you start saying like, well, I'm going to put this ladder stand up and this is my spot, like, man, you're really counting on a lot of luck after that, or creating kind of that little mecca for deer to come in. So like the first thing I would say to people is just think about that. If you feel like you're limiting yourself, or you're kind of defaulting to like this stand or this spot or this blind over and over again, you're probably not doing what you need to learn. And you're probably doing a really good job of just, we've heard this a million times, but those deer absolutely pattern us. And you're probably just doing a really good job on both sides of not working hard enough, or not, just not learning by observation and getting out there. And then you're giving the deer a hell of an edge by doing the same thing over and over again. That's the first thing I would probably say. Oh, you want 2 more?
No, that's a really good one. I'll just say this. There's a real interesting case study. I used to have a lease when I was in college there, and there was way too many people on it. There was just too much action in the area, and there was a small piece of public next to it. One day I was like, I'll just throw a camera up there. Way better, way better than what we were paying to hunt. And that was for free. There was still pressure there, but just the quality of deer was drastically better. And it was within a mile or two from where we were at.
Yeah. I mean, you hear that story a lot, and it's just, we really throw up some mental hurdles on that kind of stuff. And it's the same thing. I argue with Mark all the time about the lull and, hot weather, cold weather, wind, all this stuff. I'm like, dude, just get out and hunt more. You'll see that this stuff's just not true every day. It's not like a hard and fast rule that you're not going to, kill a buck during the lull. And what people don't think about a lot of times is we take this advice and go, okay, full moon bad, new moon good, or windy bad, calm good, or something like that. But when you think about like your example right there, if you're used to hunting one specific place with a level of pressure, it's like, okay, well, there's certain rules that are going to apply to that, because the deer are going to survive first. Like they're going to, however they have to operate to avoid you guys first, that matters more. And so you think about like the lull is such a good example when you've got this rush of people at the beginning of bow season in a lot of places. And then the fervor kind of dies down and you go, okay, I'm going to wait till Halloween or late October when things start to kick in. Well, if you're a deer that lives out there and you've got tons of predators trying to kill you for a week or 2 weeks, and all of a sudden that just drops off the cliff, you're going to move more. Like that's going to mitigate some of these effects of the full moon or it being October 5th or whatever. Like, so maybe in some situations, your deer movement might die right down to nothing on October 10th. But if you're a public land hunter and all of a sudden there's, 10% of the people out there hunting that there was 2 weeks ago, you have to factor that in, and it's gonna play into your strategy.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So do you think that let's dive into the lull just a little bit more. So do you think that it's just the added pressure of those, first week of excitement, maybe that opening day when people take work off, or maybe that first weekend that people have off, and just that influx of pressure in the area is the cause of that? Or just dive into a little bit more of what your thought is on the lull.
I think it has a bunch of factors to it. So I think we bought into the lull a lot because we like to sit field edges and we like to sit the same stands over and over again. And so if you go out, let's say, here in Minnesota, over in Wisconsin, the opener this year, September 18th. So if you go out and you sit the first couple weekends of the season and you go to that bean field stand or that alfalfa stand, like eventually those deer are going to figure that out. They're going to be scent checking that field. They're going to see you coming in, see you going out. They're going to smell you after you're gone. And it's going to be less likely that there's going to be like, I'm not going to go poke my nose out into that bean field in daylight. Mm-hmm. Well, if you didn't adjust to that at all, you'd be like, man, I was seeing tons of deer in September and now it's just a ghost town. Well, is that evidence of the lull or is that evidence of something else? And we have that happen a lot. And then you think about, the leaves are starting to come down, starting to get a little bit more open. Their testosterone's kicking in. They're not hanging out with their buddies as much. And I see this a lot where I hunt the lull a lot. Like I really like early October, but it's always staging area type of stuff. And it's thick cover type of stuff. And I just think that they just transition when the woods start to open up a little bit, they start to transition back into those places where there's, maybe a next level of cover in there. And if you don't get in and do some observation, it's like really easy to think things have slowed down a lot. But I've actually had some of my best hunting is on public land at a time when it's just not supposed to be good, but it's never in the easy spots anymore. It's like never in that gimme spot you're hoping to arrow one on opening night. Like that stuff's gone.
Those early October, mid-October hunts, you just mentioned, if you're not making those observations to get into that second layer of cover, is that coming from like observation sits, like sitting back and observing, or is that coming from in-season scouting? Or is that coming from trail cameras? Like, what is that? What is your early October, strategy or scouting strategy to put you in those places?
All of the above. I mean, I think the hard thing that we have going on with this is I think it's hard for people to kind of sandbag a hunt to watch more than anything, and you might shoot one on an observation sit, right? Like I'm just hunting, like what your question there, it kind of reminds me, I hunted turkeys with this dude down in Missouri one time, and I had arrowed my bird the day before. So we were out the next morning and I was kind of just running camera and we were messing around, and we had a bird gobbling down the ridge. And I whispered to him, like, are you going to give him some tree yelps? And he just looked at me and he goes, I don't I just yelp. Like, he's like, I don't know what that means. Yeah. I just call to him. Like when we say an observation stand, like a typical example would be just, if I'm going into like the big woods of northern Wisconsin, I'll have an idea where I want to go, but I'll start walking in there and I'm not necessarily super keyed in on big buck sign. Just like, where's the deer sign? Like I'm looking for a concentration of deer first and then see what that offers me. And the hard part is if you start getting into something where you're like, man, this trail's pretty pounded, or there's a couple rubs here, or there's a scrape there. The hard part is just to stop it, get up in a tree, watch. Like usually we want to just keep going until we find that just banging spot that's tore up. But a lot of times you just end up wandering around and you don't find that. But if you get up there, you might kill a buck coming into that scrape, or you might, a more likely scenario is you'll get up there, 200 yards down the ridge toward the little creek, you'll see one cruise through, or even just see some does. Like I'm trying to really push this message, like pay attention to all the deer, especially in those situations where, you might have a, kind of a low deer density, or you're in a situation where observation, just like a typical field edge thing, isn't going to happen, because what one deer shows you is important. So, like we kind of write off the forky that comes down and crosses the river, but tomorrow it might not be that forky. And in the way he cruises through the land and uses that ridge and the way the wind was blowing, all of that stuff's important. And so those observation sits, it's kind of part scouting, but it's also like you're actively hunting for tomorrow. Like if you see what you need to see, you're moving. And if you don't see what you need to see, you're probably moving too.
Yeah. That's a pretty important message, especially in the big woods. Like that's where I do a lot of my hunting, and low deer density areas. And you oftentimes don't get the opportunity, whether you're hunting or scouting or whatever, the encounters or sightings of deer are really far and few in between in those low deer density areas. And I think that a lot of people, including myself, have been, again, going back to these mental blocks, have the thought process of 4, 5, 6, 7, mature 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old deer, mature deer are doing different things than some of these younger bucks. And when you start thinking about, okay, I just saw a spike, or I saw a forky, or I saw a good 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, work this point. And I think it oftentimes go back to, I know myself going back to, I'm hunting a different breed. Like I'm hunting a 4, 5, 6-year-old buck. He's not going to do the same thing as that 2-year-old deer. But oftentimes, because we run so many damn trail cameras, you'll see in those low deer density areas, whether it's a terrain feature, whether it's the thermals are dropping, on a hillside, whether it's the acorn crop, whatever it is, those deer tend to congregate a lot more probably than what you would see in ag ground. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you bring up something that's so important there, which comes from the industry again, is we say, these 5.5-year-old deer are vastly different than every other deer. It's like, do you know how many of those does that bust you are 5.5 years old? Like it's, and I, that's funny, but it's true, right? Like, I mean, so when you think about this, they're just deer. Like we're hunting rabbits with antlers, and you're seeing these young bucks make more mistakes, right? Like they're moving earlier and they're dumber, right? Like they don't have as many seasons of survival there, but they're traveling along that ridge. Like you said, like if the thermals are doing a certain thing, or the wind swirling a certain spot, or whatever advantage there is there, they might be a little bit faster and a little more cavalier about their travel. But that forky that goes down the ridge, he knows that, I can smell everything ahead of me. I can see everything down here. That big buck does too. He's just less likely to do it in daylight, probably. And he's probably going to move a little bit slower down the trail and be a little bit more cautious. But it's not like we've been told that these things are like these, unicorns, man. And then, like you said, you start running cameras out there. I mean, I think that's one of the coolest things trail cameras did for us, is they showed us who was living out there. And a lot of us got a huge surprise when you see in places where you're like, man, I never see big bucks out here. Then you run a camera and you're like, okay, they live here. What's going on? Why don't I see them?
We've kind of gone all over the place. We do have some scripted questions I think that we do want to get into before we get too far into this. Do you want to take a jump at those, Jake?
Sure. Yeah. So here in the first 20 minutes or so, we've learned a little bit more about like your style and philosophy and core principles of a deer hunter. So now we're going to put it to test, and we're asking you, if you had to design your dream DIY over the counter hunt, break that down. And this is not Iowa. So this is something like someone could go do tomorrow or plan with very short planning. So what is the state that you pick? And then we have all the questions that break it down.
The state that I enjoy the most to whitetail hunt would probably be North Dakota. And that's over the counter.
And why is that?
I love river bottom whitetail hunting. I love it. I mean, I do a lot of big wood stuff and a lot of ag hunting and, hunted them down south in different places. But when you can get just, hundreds of thousands of acres of public land with river systems running through there, that's what
your dream
likes. Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cause that was the next question is we were going to ask, is it big wood swamp farm country, but it is giant river bottoms
for fun. If you, I honestly think if you want to become the best deer hunter possible, head into the big woods and then come out in 10 years and tell me what you learned. Cause it's going to take a while, but if just for pure fun on a over the counter hunt, and especially on public land, those Western river bottom hunts, and, you can find that in South Dakota, you can find that in Nebraska, farther west as well, Wyoming, Montana. But for an over the counter hunt that I just consistently look forward to, and I should say this too, it's not just because the whitetail hunting is good. Like I love when you have a lot of visibility because you feel like you're always in the game, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you can sit up and glass 2 miles of river bottom, you're going to find somebody who gets you excited. But I love being where I might see some elk or some antelope off stand or mule deer. And when I get out of the truck, I smell sage. And it's like this an environment that's just special. I love being there. So there's more to it than just going and having access to, big whitetails on public land.
So Chad, the 10 years in the big woods, does that ring true to what you're at right now? You're 6 or 7?
Yeah. It's 2015. It's 14. I guess you could say 14, 15. It's tough, man. Like
a few more years of the hard knocks here.
Well, I'm bypassing this year, so I don't think it'll take me an extra calendar year to get that notch on my belt at 10. Man, it's tough. It's just a totally different animal. I mean, again, we've talked about this all the time on our podcast. I'm not going to bore our listeners with, my background coming from hunting a really good few 100-acre private farm and ag ground, super easy to hunt. I mean, it's textbook. I mean, anybody with a little bit of wit can go in there and kill 150-inch deer, and that's the way it hunts. It's just one of those special pieces. And then going west and kind of falling in love with the vastness of being in, like what you said, those just big, open, remote areas that feel like wilderness. Like you're not worried about tractors and you can't hear the dog bark. You can't see house lights and, all the stuff that you get in, more populated areas. You don't have that in a lot of the big wood settings. And that's what draws me to the big woods. But it has kicked my ass for 6 years. I mean, opportunities are there. Just, one thing after another, but
it's the toughest. I think it's the toughest whitetail hunting. And I don't think, I think a lot of people, when they hear us say that, they assume big woods means, up north. And that's kind of what we're specifically talking about. But I don't think it matters if you're in the UP or you're down in Louisiana or down in Florida. If you're in a place with unbroken timber for miles and miles and miles and miles, and you're not around ag, you're in big woods, and it's tough.
Yep.
Very nice. So, do you have something you want to throw in there? Otherwise,
I was going to go back to the North Dakota.
Okay. I know once we get talking about the big woods, here we go. Buckle up. Okay. So we have North Dakota. Habitat is river bottoms, and then you have to pick your 7-day stretch. So you're burning 5 vacation days and a weekend.
And I'm out in public land.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, this is going to sound weird, maybe makes me sound stupid, but I can tell you this year I'm doing this hunt and my 7 days are the end of September into the first week of October. And the reason for that is when you take a state like North Dakota that has an early opener, a Labor Day weekend opener, that velvet whitetail thing is so popular now. Like it is crazy how many people are out trying to shoot an early season buck, mule deer, whitetails. In that country, there's residents drawing elk tags. So it's a zoo. And then you get the, as you get closer to the rut, because I've been out there a whole bunch, so this is not an accident that I picked those dates. You get closer to the rut, you start seeing people come out and start thinking about whitetails and spending more time in those river bottoms, as opposed to just running the hills for muley and elk and just covering ground. And so I've kind of found in some of these early opener states, there's a sweet spot of almost no pressure when nobody wants to hunt. You might run into a Sharpie hunter out there, a sharp-tail hunter, or you might run into a few random people, but I want those river bottom deer to myself, and I want to glass them up. And I know that when you get into that kind of open country stuff and those little patches of cottonwoods and willows, that I'm going to see deer. There isn't a day that would go by out there if you had the right glassing point, you're not going to pick up some deer. And so then it's a matter of, are they going down and crossing the river? Are they browsing through this rabbit brush down here? What are they doing? And it just, that timing gives you the chance to just work the deer. I'm not thinking somebody's going to come in here and screw this up, or somebody's going to sneak down the river bottom and screw this up. I'm kind of just thinking like, all I got to do is figure these deer out. And there's like it's such a nice feeling to know that if you go out to glass, even though you could be hunting, you go out and sit and you're glassing and you're like, okay, these bucks did this morning. I'm going to come back here tonight. I'm going to watch them again. And you might do that for a couple days without having like a big concern that somebody else is going to blow up your plan. So you get to like really put together this pattern on these deer. I love that. That's why the timing seems stupid.
Mm-hmm. When you get into that scenario where you're glassing deer, you glass them in the morning, you glass them in the evening, and you're trying to pick up that pattern. When do you have enough information to go in and make a decision? Okay, I'm going to hunt this evening, or I'm going to hunt in the morning. Walk us through that thought process of how you're kind of filing that data away.
It depends what they show me, I guess. A lot of times I feel comfortable if I have a morning and an evening to glass. Like I feel like there's something to work off of, because if you're sitting on a tree on a river crossing, you can see up and down that river, depending on where you're at, sometimes for hundreds of yards. And so that's another reason I kind of like those hunts. You don't blank. Like you're not going to go out and sit and not see any deer. This isn't northern Wisconsin, like you might see 26 deer in a sit, even though only 4 of them were anywhere near you. And so you can work off of that, but it depends what they're doing. If I see a group of bucks or a buck come down and cross a river in one spot, this morning when he comes back to bed, or in the evening, a couple of them use the same crossing, that might be all I need, to go there. If the conditions allow me to get in there and the wind is right for a setup. But sometimes you don't see that, sometimes they're browsing and they're not crossing the river to go, through a specific little pinch point or something. And the problem with it is, and you learn this the hard way, believe me, is if you come from a place where you're kind of hunting in tighter confines, right? Like you're hunting, deciduous forest or ag land or big woods. When you get out there, you'll glass those bucks and they're a mile away. And you're like, okay, they walked out right there and they filtered through this patch of brush. I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to hang a stand and shoot them tomorrow. Then you walk in there and you realize that patch of brush is like 50 acres and you have no idea which trail they actually took. Like you get really good at going, okay, like, did they really walk right next to that cottonwood and that I could go set up in? Or was it something where they kind of filtered through here and there in a meadow and I'm not going to be hardly within rifle range? So you kind of playing that game. But if you see them give you something that's just like, oh man, they walked right down to that river, they drank, they crossed right here, they walked up past that tree, then it's like, okay, let's just get in there and see if we can get them tomorrow.
Yeah, makes sense.
You described yourself as something earlier, so this might be kind of a dumb question, but what is your weapon of choice?
Oh, bow. Yeah.
You said you were a bow hunter, so I figured, yeah, for sure. When's the last time you killed a deer with a gun?
That's a good question, buddy. Maybe 2015, maybe. I've only killed a couple with a rifle. I've killed a handful of them with a muzzleloader over the years. I used to do that quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But in the last, I find myself just defaulting to the bow more and more and more. And, I grew up with that. Like in my family, we never had like the traditional rifle hunt, like we never had the cabin to go to or anything. And so it was like, when gun season started in Minnesota, I was like, my season's over until the late season. And I know it's going to be super hard. So it was kind of just like the the unofficial end to the year. And it wasn't till I was probably way out of college that I even got a rifle and hunted a little bit. And I realized I kind of enjoyed it. Like I enjoy that feeling of sitting there and being like, man, if he walks out 250 yards away, I could probably shoot him. I'd miss him because I'm a terrible shot with a rifle. But I also realized like I was sitting there going, God, I'm crossing my fingers, hoping something comes by. And it felt so different than bow hunting to me. And so I'm just drawn to bow hunting, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Very interesting. Okay. So then this is the last question here for your dream DIY over the counter hunt. Are you going solo or do you want to go with a group?
Well, this year I'm going with 3 other buddies. That's kind of our fun hunt for the year together, but I'm kind of open to either. You know, I like hunting with my buddies, and I also really like the freedom of just hunting solo. And I do think this may be a weird segue for that, but I do think that people should, if you're really interested in having a kind of a fulfilling hunt and like learning a lot and kind of leveling up your game and enjoying it, everybody travels with their friends, right? Like nobody starts in Pennsylvania and says I'm going to Colorado solo for elk. But and elk's a little bit different of a thing, but a whitetail hunt, man, if you can go out of state on your own, you'll realize, like, man, I'm only accountable for myself. Like I don't have to think about anybody. I can eat where I want. I can do what I want. I can glass all day. I don't have to be back. I don't have to worry about picking anybody up at 10 in the morning when they're done hunting. And that freedom and that lack of pressure allows you to make really good decisions and enjoy it. And so people are really hesitant to go do that, but it's really a valuable kind of trip.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. So I think we nailed down your dream DIY hunt, because I just wanted to map that against of how you described yourself as well. So it seems like it tracks.
Yeah,
it tracks.
There shouldn't be too many surprises there, I don't think.
Sure. Yeah. So, okay, this is something else. I think it was an episode that you did with Mark last year, and I don't know, it was about the back 40, and there was a common joke of like, you'll shoot whatever. Like there's a point where you're on a trip and you get a little cagey. It sounds like you want to kill something. So, and then I also read one of your articles about shooting what makes you happy. So I want to go down that wormhole because I think you have some interesting perspective. So the floor's yours. Would you describe yourself as killing anything? Just when it feels right.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be a fool to not embrace that, because it's 100% true. Man, I don't even know where to go with this. So specifically to the back 40, that property that they have out there in Michigan, Mark developed that and he worked a ton on it, right? He got to know the deer, and I showed up there in August. We hung some stands. I spent a couple days there, and then I showed back up in November to film that episode. And to me, not knowing a property and going to a state, I'd never hunted Michigan before, it would be insane to be a trophy hunter in that situation to me. Like, it wasn't a situation where you're like, okay, if I put in 5 or 6 days, 140 inches is going to walk by. It's like, I'm going to be really happy to shoot something. And I look at those situations because they come up a lot, right? Like people, I preach this all the time when you travel to hunt. People will be like, well, I want to go to Iowa, or I want to go to Kansas, or I want to go to X state or Y state because it has big bucks. And it's like, yeah, like, sure. Like maybe the state has a reputation for big bucks, but are you like consistently killing them at home? Like, are you at a level where a big time trophy hunt is like in your purview or not? Like, and this is so individual to us, and it's so individual to the situation. So I'll use this example. If I go, like I drew Iowa last year, right? Like I went down and hunted public land, and I had scouted down there and turkey hunted and got to know some of these areas. And I knew I was going to give myself a lot of time, right? So I wasn't going to Iowa and I wasn't going to shoot a scrapper. Like I knew I was going to fill my doe tag down there. I was going to have some fun with it and hunt a decent buck. Now, if I go to Oklahoma and I hunt public land, that's so different than a lot of my hunting. I know it's not like the potential's not there. So I'm going there to hunt deer. And yeah, you might see a great one. I've seen great ones on public land in Oklahoma. They get piss pounded down there, and like it's not easy, but it just, the difference there is like I'm gonna go hunt deer, and I'm coming home with something in my cooler, like I hope, Or if I go to Iowa, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna temper this a little bit because I know the possibility is really there. And I think we don't do that. I think like as hunters, we get into the situation a lot of times where it's like mature buck or nothing everywhere. And so we sort of default like to the situations we know. And it's like this buck or bust. I'm like, well, when you start traveling or you start hunting new public land or new ground and just hunting deer, if your standards don't change from that easy farm that your family owns and you can set up, you're probably not going to enjoy it. And it's really important to enjoy this stuff. Like we haven't really pushed that message that hard. It's just kill big bucks. Here's how you do it. It's like, man, we're not curing cancer here. Like we're sitting in a tree trying to shoot rabbits with antlers with sharp sticks. This is stupid in some ways. Like it's awesome. I love it. But you know what I mean? Like, it's not like we're working on kids' cancer here and we're almost on a scientific breakthrough. It's just this personal hobby thing that's super fun and it means a lot to us, but like you should go have fun with it. Like if you take it too seriously or you take yourself too seriously, it starts to suck.
Yeah, I think that's a progression that that really everybody goes through. I think that, we all are drawn to the sport for some kind of, whether it's personal interest or it's like a family pastime that's been passed down. And it's from the outside looking in as a newbie, it is fun. Whether it's, sharing that experience with family members, or maybe it's personal development on your end, enjoying the wilderness, whatever it is. But then as you start to find some success, it's hard not to track or match yourself against like other social statuses with guys killing big deer. And if I know so many guys that go through that progression, it's fun in the beginning. They want to start killing bigger deer. And then the learning curve or success rate just basically plunders to zero. And you find yourself, at the end of that 3, 4, 5 year journey of trying to kill big mature deer on a consistent basis, like it makes it miserable. Like you said, it's it's such a whitetail hunting to me is such a selfish sport. We do it for mostly personal reasons. And if you're not having fun doing it, you can't do it for a very long time. Like it's just, you burn yourself out. And it just becomes miserable.
Yeah.
So I think your message about having fun and really knowing the parameters around your hunt and making that something that's tangible that you can achieve going into that hunt is probably even more important on that front.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. And I've never really put it the way you just put it, as whitetail hunting being a selfish endeavor, but it absolutely is. Nobody else cares. Like
nobody cares.
You're not doing this for anyone else. And if you're not having some fun with it, and I've talked about this a lot, but part of the reason, like that article that you brought up there, part of the reason they wanted me to write that is because it might seem like other people care what you kill, but they really don't. Like they really, like I talk to Mark about this all the time because he thinks everybody's invested in his bucks. I'm like, dude, nobody like they don't care. Like, no, but I hear from them all the time. Like, no. Trust me. Like if you stop killing bucks tomorrow, it wouldn't change the world at all. Like this is for you. And like what makes you happy. And you see this a lot of times with people. It's part of the reason why a lot of people who seem to really enjoy it and keep that fire going a long time, they do go travel to new places and they go camp here and they hunt there and they're always trying new stuff because they're just keeping that fire going. Like, okay, this is what I enjoy. And, for me, I figured that out. I've done the big buck thing and like target one buck and like been, all in on the trophy stuff. And I just realized like, okay, I don't enjoy this. Like I enjoy shooting deer and eating them a lot. Like I like that part a lot. And I do like the aspect of hunting big bucks in certain situations, but really what I like is seeing new ground and trying to figure out the deer there. Like that for me. And I know other people are different. I have buddies who are like, give me 80 acres where I can put in a food plot and a pond and a redneck blind. And I want to go sit there and I want to, hunt a week during the rut, eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and shoot my buck. Like that's okay. Like go nuts. If you figure out if that's what blows the wind up your skirt, go nuts. But if you're not having fun, there's a reason. And you have to understand too, like this is challenging. Like this is not, when you see the success of some of these guys out there, you're seeing that like one part boiled down and distilled to the trophy photos and the grip and grins. You're not seeing all of the work and all of the, the 3 weeks where they didn't see a deer and the ticked off wife at home, and the nights where you're like, oh, I can't sleep, and you're looking at stupid Onyx over and over again. Like, you're not seeing that stuff. And so just understand, like you said, this is a selfish thing. What are you doing this for? And if you're not having fun, is there a way to figure out how to have that fun?
Yeah,
that matters.
You said something there about, I guess, testing yourself, going out, being adventurous on like learning new ground. Is, in your opinion, is that the fastest way to get yourself to become a better hunter, is to put yourself in new scenarios on new ground?
Without question. I mean, you gotta think, are you either, if you're hunting one property, which is what a lot of people do, you're learning to hunt the deer there. Like, you're learning that ground, right? If you go to a bunch of different places, you're learning to hunt deer. It's just a difference. And I'm not saying one's good or one's bad, but like, if you really want to understand how to develop some skills and take them anywhere with you, I don't think there's a better way than go to new places and figure out what the deer do.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. I think a lot of good stuff in there. I think this past year went to Nebraska, and the first initial thought was like, I don't want to go there and shoot a little buck. And then we got there and I was like, I'm going to shoot a little buck and it's going to be fun. That's exactly what we did. And then ended up shooting my first mule deer too, but that's exactly what it was. It was just change, having your goals be fluid with the situation. I don't want to go home and eat a tag. Like, we drove out here. I want to shoot a deer. And that's exactly, I think, but there's still some level of pride that comes in here of like, well, you went all that way and shot a quote unquote little buck, but like, I went there just to literally have fun. That was it. It was a fun trip. It was the end of the year. There wasn't any deer to chase where I was at. So pack up and go. So I think that's important.
It is important. And you think about, when you talk about like mule deer, that this is another thing that happens to people all the time. They go on a mule deer hunt and they want a big one, and they go and they glass for days and days and days, and they might get 2 stalks in a week that you're going to blow because you don't know what the hell you're doing, because you're a whitetail hunter. And if you go out mule deer hunting in a place with decent numbers and you're like, listen, I just want a mule deer, you'll have more fun hunting that way than any other hunt you've ever been on in your life, because you get to go stalk a whole bunch of them and you get to learn. I mean, I just think that stuff's so important.
Yeah, it takes, and that's, I think, to add to your level of like, you just see the grip and grin, but how about like the multiple years or multiple unsuccessful trips of people like honing their craft, or people that do go on 5 trips a year that are, starting from scratch as they show up. Those people are flat out better than a lot of, most people that are only hunting a short amount of time each year as well. It's like they're getting more reps in. And I think that's what it takes, is just getting good at a lot of different things. It takes time.
Yeah. Well, yeah. When you think about the entire process, right? Like, between just walking in the woods and seeing some sign, or glassing deer and having to read what they're doing and react to it, that all the way to when that deer walks in, even if you're shooting a little one, like, when do I draw? Where do I aim? Where's my point of impact? Where, like, okay, now I shot him and it's getting dark. What do I do now? How do I blood trail him? How do I get him out? All of that stuff makes you better, like experience. And that's why if you take somebody like Andy May or Eddie Claypool or some of these guys who are just public land killers, they've just been there and done that. Like, they just put themselves in a situation where they had 4 days or 7 days in X state or Y state, and they did all the e-scouting they could, but they showed up and they made something happen. And if they didn't, they were just stacking up experience. Like Mark and I just interviewed Zach Fehrenbaugh from the Hunting Public, and Zach's got an unconventional style, man, but he's hunting the way he wants to. And by the time he's 40, 45, think how much time that guy will have in the field. I mean, even if the Hunting Public got canceled tomorrow, that guy would keep hunting that way, probably for whitetails and elk and mule deer and antelope and everything else, turkeys. And you just think about, like, yeah, that's his job. And those guys are getting paid well now to go do that. Like, there's a different part to that, but you can't divorce that from the fact that guy is getting so much experience hunting in a way that makes him feel good, and he's successful at. Like, that's where the killers are born, man.
It's a much better way of saying what I was trying to articulate. So I appreciate you. What he just said was what I was trying to say in a fumbled fashion. So
I'm here for you, buddy.
Cool. I appreciate that. So let's see.
I want to make a super hard transition, unless you have something else here, Jay.
Nope, go for it.
All right, super hard transition. And this goes back to, some of your experience in the dog world. And I know a lot of the stuff is bird dog related, but I want to get your perspective on something. A lot of guys, I guess let me back up just one step. Coming from the trail camera space, we're always talking trail camera strategies, best tactics, best practices. And for years and years and years, you hear guys, including myself, talk about going in and checking cameras in the rain. And the concept there is that precipitation is going to wash your scent away. There's going to be less ground scent. There's going to be less scent on the actual things that you come in contact with, which could be camera, could be brush, could be, tree, whatever the case is. And we've spoken openly about this and kind of given our advice as that being good practice, like using precipitation to go in and check cameras and do scouting in the rain because of that thought process. But over the last 18, 24 months, we've talked to a lot of dog people, and it's more specifically like bloodhounds, tracking dogs. Talk to more of those people on this topic, but I want to get your perspective. And the thought process there is that moisture and precipitation actually increases the ability for specific animals to smell, including whitetails. And when you start thinking about this, I'm sure both of you guys have had stand sightings where you see a buck come in and he's just maybe hanging up outside of range. Maybe it's 40, 50, 60 yards or whatever he's doing. And you can see him lick his nose to kind of gather moisture there and then stick his nose up in the air because he's trying to capture more scent. He's trying to figure out what is going on. He's trying to get, a taste of everything that's happening. So what is your thought process and perspective on scouting, checking cameras, all of that in the rain in regards to the way that whitetails smell?
I think it's beneficial. I mean, I think so. When you talk about like a buck licking his nose, that's exactly what he's doing. I mean, he's making it better. He's making it easier for him to smell stuff. But and anybody who runs dogs will tell you, like, hot, dry conditions, like hot, dry, calm conditions are the freaking worst to hunt in. The dogs, they got nothing to work with. It's tough, and you can watch it. And dogs and deer are like, I mean, they're not like a perfect comparison, probably scent wise, but they're pretty close. Like you look at the number of scent receptors that dogs and deer have, it's like they're both over like 300 million in their nose or so. I mean, it's like, they're probably on a fairly similar level, but I really think that like wet conditions are really, they favor them, right? Like some moisture in the air. But when you're talking like a downpour, like we know that kind of resets things to some extent. I mean, there's a reason that the old timers used to tell you to go hunt scrapes after a downpour, right? Like if you can get out there the next morning, they're going to come and check. And they, why are those bucks going to do that? They're freshening the scent, right? Like, I mean, mostly that's what we assume. That's what we speculate. And I don't have any reason to believe that that's not true. And so I do think like if you can plan it and you can get in there when it's going to be a downpour, I think that's a good move. But I also know just from working with dogs, I mean, so two things on that. I know I'm going all over the place here. A lot of people just don't have that option, right? Like I was just in Wisconsin with my daughter and we were working on some stuff. Like we just had to go when we could go. So like that's part of it. But if you got that farm down the road that you can hunt and you can go in there and you can plan around the weather, I don't think that's a bad thing. Like I think you're doing yourself a favor. Sometimes you can't do it. But the other thing with it is we get into this scent thing a lot with deer, right? Can you beat their nose? Can't beat their nose. Maybe you can. Got to play the wind. When you start messing around with bird dogs, especially shed dogs, training shed dogs, because a shed isn't out there, sloughing off skin cells and breathing. It's a different thing. It's a bone, right? Like the scent is not nearly as prevalent. When you start seeing how hard it is to beat a dog's nose, even with an antler, it's like, man, it's pretty tough to beat deer. Just like in general, when you touch something or you walk through, it can't, I totally believe it can be done with certain methods, but it is tough. Like I think that's kind of why we default to like play the wind, because it is like, it's so much easier than a lot of these other methods to try to beat a deer's nose.
Yeah, I would agree with that a lot. I think with the whole moisture thing, I think that there's a threshold there. I think that, you mentioned or used the words like downpour. I think it's different if you're in a light rain or mist compared to that torrential downpour where you have, it's raining buckets. You have a half inch of rain or whatever, an inch of rain coming down in a half hour. I think that there's two different things there, but we've actually read some, scientific studies, and we want to do a whole piece of content around this. But there's some really interesting academic studies based on scent molecules and basically H2O and how they attach and how they move, more like a box of marbles. Like if you just dumped a box of marbles out and watch the way everything kind of scattered more randomly, they were drawing those comparisons with the way that different animals smell with those molecules attaching to H2O. So there's some scientific information there. It needs to be probably presented in the right way and really digestible, I guess, for whitetail hunters. But I think that there is something there.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of similar to the ozone argument too. There's a lot going on in those conversations. So when you think about how scent is attaching to a water molecule and how that's dispersing in the environment versus just being released into the air and blowing to whatever spot, there's a lot going on there. Yeah, and it's the same thing with ozone. Like when people talk about ozone generators and ozonics and stuff like that, and people are just like so dismissive and like, oh, it can't work in an open air environment. I'm like, well, do you know how ozone works? Because obviously you don't. And like when you start messing with dogs in ozone, you start to see like there's a reason we've been using this stuff for like 150 years to essentially bleach things. Like it works, but you have to use it in a certain way.
Yeah. So are you an advocate for in the stand ozone use?
Yes, to some extent. So how familiar? I know this is
really, really familiar, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, people will say, well, ozone floats away or ozone can't work in an open area. We know ozone sinks. We know it's heavier than the atmosphere. Right. We know all that stuff, right? We know that it binds to scent molecules and it neutralizes them. Like when you mess around with a bird dog and you're using those shed antlers, like I said, one of the only ways I've ever seen where I'm like, I beat my dog's nose is with ozone. Like when you watch it, it's like very clear whether a dog's getting downwind and picking up that scent or not. And you can test that out to some extent. Now, like, does it apply to deer? Like, oh, maybe, right. But so for me, when ozonics came out and I started using them on public land here in the Twin Cities. I'm like, I don't believe this. I'm just going to do this and I'm going to prove it wrong and I can move on with my life.
Sure.
And I started seeing things where I'm like, man, this isn't tracking with what I expected. So I started learning about ozone. And what I found, at least for me personally, was, if there's a 15 mile per hour sustained wind and I can play it, I don't need to carry that thing along. I just don't, but if I know that wind's going to die down to 5 miles an hour, it's going to be variable, and I'm working on bow range type of deer, then I felt a real benefit. Like that's when that ozonics goes with me, because I know, like everybody who bow hunts or everybody who deer hunts, I should say, knows those situations where you're sitting there and it just gets calm. And you're like, oh, this is perfect. But you feel that on the back of your neck and then you feel it on your face and it's just leveling off. That's when I found real benefits to it. So sometimes I use it.
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting, we've used ozone. I use ozone in my, whitetail system, not so much in the field, but just for clothing applications to clean stuff for the most part. But we're very up to speed with, the molecular structure, the negatively charging molecules and rearranging molecules, and actually chemically, all the chemical compounds. And like you said, there's a lot that goes into that. It becomes very, scientific for whitetail hunters. But every university across America, hospitals, there's so many major corporations or facilities that use ozone to clean things, that the science, you can't argue that it doesn't work, because it does.
Yeah, we've literally been using it since the 1880s, but they're long gone now. But when ozone came into the hunting industry, the guys who started the company that's gone now, the reason they got the idea for it was one of them was a Vietnam vet, and in their field operations, the medics in wherever he was stationed or whatever he was doing, they would use ozone generators in their tents out there because they were in, they're in a jungle environment, and they wanted to sterilize the air to operate in to mitigate the risk of infection. And so they were using ozone back in the 60s in, Laos or where in the jungles to, basically sterilize the air before they started operating in there. And he took that and he's like, man, how, like if that's getting rid of that, like, is there something we can do here? And they had a big unit that was designed for, I think, to treat clothing or something at that point, but that's kind of how it came in. Like, this is not, like we didn't just magically come up with this. It's been around a long time.
Yeah.
Repurposed for the whitetail world.
Yeah. Yeah. But you should also play the wind.
For sure. Are we anything else? And we'll dive into rapid rounds here. You have anything, Chad?
No, let's do the.
Right.
We've been on for about an hour, so let's do the rapid questions.
We're ripping this right out of your guys' podcast here. The rapid questions. We figured it's okay because it's you guys. So copy and paste here for you. Does the moon phase carry?
If Mark's lawyers come after you, like I had nothing to do with it.
Okay, deal. Does the moon phase carry any weight in your decision to hunt or not? No. Okay.
Nope.
Would you take a 50-yard shot on a whitetail with a bow?
Not anymore. Nope.
What was the furthest deer you've killed with a bow?
I've killed them in the 40s. I shot one that was 49 one time in Nebraska. I've shot a few wounded ones far. A couple gut shot ones, but I went through the long distance phase and before I had kids, and I shot a lot. And now I like my deer at 20 yards. I'm real happy when they walk right at 20 yards.
For sure. Okay. So you can only take one of these with you to the stand for the rest of your hunts. Are you taking a grunt tube or rattling antlers?
Grunt tube.
Easy decision.
Yeah. I don't ever rattle deer in.
Gotcha. Okay. Fixed blade or mechanical broadheads? Fixed. Easy decision too.
No, I'm not that, like elk, it would be a very easy decision. Whitetails, it's not that easy of a decision for me. I would maybe err on the side of fixed, but I'm not opposed at all to using good mechanicals.
Okay. Should you make noise to stop a deer before you shoot?
Sometimes. You don't want those wishy-washy answers.
Yeah, you got to give a yes or no. The rules.
I have to say yes, because sometimes you got to stop them.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. That's fair. Only pick one season to scout. Which would you pick? Winter, summer, or in season? I probably know the answer to this one. Maybe not.
Probably in season, but it just barely edges out winter. Just barely.
Okay. Interesting. This is specific to this episode here. Which state has the better deer hunters? Minnesota, Ohio, or Illinois, in your opinion?
Man, I don't know. I know I'm supposed to say Minnesota, but I have so much experience around some of these hunters. It makes me, you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say Ohio just because I have no experience with Ohio hunters. I'm going to throw a flyer out there. I don't know. Okay. How about Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Your home state's pissed off right now.
Look, they've been mad at me for a long time for different reasons. It's okay.
Sure. Okay. So for the entire season, you can either use 5 standard trail cameras or 2 cell cameras. What are you taking?
Standards.
Why is that?
More options.
More options is more data.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'm a impulsive idiot. And so I love cell cameras. I love them, but I need to go into my camera usage. Like I need to use cameras in a way that they complement lots of other stuff I'm doing, and standard cameras placed in spots where I just have questions. Like, are they using this trail? That tends to work with my style better than just getting that, like dopamine drip when the pictures show up and I'm like, oh, that buck was in there last night. It doesn't work with my decision making strategy as well, even though I enjoy the hell out of them. And so I need to this is going to be a weird thing. This is why I quit drinking. Like I can't I just need I know myself. I need
Yeah.
to control myself in different ways, and I need those cameras that are not sending me photos. Let me put it that way.
That just shows how powerful cell cameras are too. Because I always talk to people like, just FYI, they're addicting. Once you run one cell camera, one's not going to be enough.
Dude, they're terrible. I mean, they're so freaking fun. They're so fun, but it just, they're moderation, man.
Sure.
Need moderation.
Right on. Okay. So we tailored this one for you as well. Would you rather have exclusive permission and management control on 60 acres in a good deer neighborhood, or 1,500 acre tract of public in Southwest Wisconsin?
Oh, that is a good one. Because I don't know, man. I've been spending a lot of time in Southwestern Wisconsin recently, and it's pretty goddamn good down there. It depends. Is the 60 acres close to my house?
Out the back door. Yeah. Within 10 minutes.
I'll take that. Yeah. Cause I have twin 9-year-olds, man. I need to get them in the woods every chance I can. So I'm going to default to that. But if you're talking just having pure fun, I'd probably take that public.
Interesting. Okay, cool. And then the almighty power question, the drill. Basically, if you don't kill a 5-year-old buck or better on these conditions, let me rephrase that. Okay. You have to kill a 5-year-old buck. You can only hunt one day in one place. What day do you choose and where?
I would probably pick September 1. I want to pick the rut, but I'm not gonna.
Uh-huh.
I would probably pick September 1 or the opening day in North Dakota. Maybe Nebraska.
For a 5-year-old buck?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like the predictability of early season bucks. I mean, you got the wild card of a ton of different people out there, but the rut, I love the rut, but it can be a lot tougher than we portray it sometimes, especially for, consistent encounters like that. I'd rather take a buck that I can work. And he's like, I woke up, I'm hungry. I'm going to go this way like I have for the last 3 months. I'll take that deer.
Yeah. We're really good at remembering the highlights of the rut and forgetting about the 12 days where you didn't see crap.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. It's easy to do that.
It is not. I mean, I always use Iowa as an example. I'm like, you got the entire month of November to bow hunt without any gun interference. Mm-hmm. And you still look at the success rate in the best state out there with the best month to hunt. And the success rate's not that great. And it's like, man, if the rut was the answer to your problems, I think that, you'd be looking at like a 98% success rate for bow hunters in that state. And you're not. Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah. Great point. Okay. Well, that's all the questions we have for you. We certainly appreciate you hopping on here. This is a lot of fun. And we'll give you if there's anything you want to plug or anything, feel free to take the floor here.
Just the Meat Eater Wired to Hunt stuff we're doing, go to Meat Eater /Wired, and we've got just tons of whitetail content coming out. So, we're doing the Wired to Hunt podcast, the Wired to Hunt Foundations podcast, but we're making videos and articles, and it's just a nonstop. So anybody, and a lot of it is, if you're interested in getting into hunting, there's some upper level stuff there too, but there's a lot of, how do you pick the right arrows? How do you do this? How do you scout this? A lot of, we kind of felt like we were talking over a lot of the whitetail audience. And so we're like, we kind of really have to address this market of people who are new to it or haven't had much success or maybe a couple of years in. So it really covers a wide range, and that's all over there at the Meat Eater site they can check out.
Well, we will link to that. And once again, appreciate it and good luck this season.
Awesome. Thank you guys. This was a lot of fun.